My name is Spencer Walsh, and welcome to today's episode of Hidden History. In late June 1776, as a massive British fleet prepared to invade New York, a complex drama played itself out in the headquarters of General George Washington's Continental Army in New York City. A former bodyguard of the general was set to be hanged for conspiracy against the Patriot Rebellion and, of all people, against Washington himself. We'll tell you the story of how that happened and how the Republic's greatest founding father was almost killed before he could even found. A very, very interesting story to be sure, and the material that we will be using today is from history.com here. Writing this one up, it's a very interesting situation because this is what it's all about, like this Continental Army here, and because pretty much I think the best, if you're looking at the revolution, like the romantic, you could have this kind of very much, as we talked about in the last episode, racialized kind of like, circular but not really moving kind of liberal view of history, like we talked about the 1619 Project, or you can have the very romantic, like our founding fathers were the best people and they knew exactly, well, they didn't know that, they didn't know everything, but they were pretty damn smart for their time, it kind of romanticized, they got in the room, they came up with these great ideas, and they're not perfect, but they're still what we got today, that kind of mindset. I mean, the kind of stripped away romanticized version of it is really the biggest drivers of this revolution, and it's very, very rare that you see this. The biggest drivers of the American Revolution were kind of, working our ruling class people, because they were people at the top of, pretty much, because what had happened was, so, I don't know if you remember from any of your history classes, or maybe you're listening to this in or for history class or something like that, talking about salutary neglect. Pretty much the colonies had been more or less allowed to very much have a self kind of governing structure, but they had their own devolved governments, their own kind of kind of independent economy that was really kind of thriving, in large part because the British weren't kind of taxing it, and they needed, obviously, the money for that. They needed to get that cheddar up, get their money up, not their funny up. Yeah, I know. At least I got to get one kind of cringy joke out for show, I feel like. But anyway, they needed to get the money after the Civil War, and pretty much what happened was that was what kind of got rid of the revolution, because I think the broadest sense was pretty much the richest people in all these states in all throughout the country were like, we are already we're independent, we've had success, we could be doing this on our own, we have our own values, and a lot, it is true that a lot of the people from the colonies came in a kind of an explicit rejection of, and they have had some kind of prior bad experience, or some kind of reason where they would want to distance themselves or in some way kind of reject the values of Great Britain, and those kind of change into more American ideals over time, and the Shining City on the Hill ideology that really kind of played over in America's ruling class, they kind of formed out of the revolution. But anyway, let's kind of zoom in here to June 28th, where some 20,000 people gathered in a field just north of the city and watched as a private in the Continental Army mounted the gallows on charges of sedition, mutiny, and treachery. The doomed man was Thomas Hickey, an Irish-born former British soldier who had joined the rebel cause after the outbreak of war in 1775. Most importantly, Hickey was a member of Washington's Life Guard, the elite squad tasked with protecting the commander-in-chief, on whose shoulders the pretty much entire fate of the rebellion appeared to rest. It was very much a big deal, because George Washington, without a doubt, for so many people, was just the first celebrity in American history. And he was, really viewed as someone who'd be kind of a king figure, kind of coming out of nowhere with his own merit and winning that position. So the thing with Hickey was he would become the first Continental soldier to be executed for treason, thanks to his participation in a shadowy plot to foil the rebellion and possibly even kill or kidnap Washington. The plot apparently involved the royal governor of New York, the mayor of New York City, and more than a dozen others, though Hickey would be the only one to hang for it. And the thing was, New York, fun fact, you may think it was like the South or something like that, had the most British loyalists than any other state per capita, or just period. And they're both the first conspiracy, the secret plot to kill George Washington. Brad Metzler and Joss Mensch revisit the tumultuous events of the spring and summer of 1776. Just before the British invasion of New York began the first large-scale conflict of the Revolutionary War. Through close examination of existing evidence, they trace the development of the Hickey plot as well as the efforts used to root out the conspiracy, including the formation of a secret committee whose methods would foreshadow today's espionage and counterintelligence work. So this was the kind of formation of, the first defense, this first kind of intelligence and the use of wartime intelligence and these first institutions, and the same people would kind of go on to form this club, which we would see very much inspired today. So when George Washington arrived in April 1776 to prepare for the British counterattack, he was well aware that threats lay all around him. Many in New York, where the powerful merchant classes dependent on secure trade with Britain, still hoped for reconciliation with the mother country. From his exile aboard a British merchant ship anchored in New York Harbor, William Tryon, the royal governor of New York, sought to undermine the Patriot cause by enlisting loyalist support in New York and the surrounding regions. Almost as soon as he arrived, a suspicious Washington tried to crack down on communication between Tryon's ship and New York colonists. In May, at his request, the New York Provincial Congress formed a secret committee to uncover conspiracies among New York's loyalists. So this is kind of the kind of devolved Congress that was very much more aligned towards these ideals of, kind of having independence, because they had that interest. They had that first interest was their own power coming from a devolved government, which could become more powerful if they left Great Britain. So, and there were some pretty big patriots in New York, to be sure. According to Metzler and Mensch, the committee, led by the prominent New York patriot John Jay, was a small, early prototype of an intelligence agency, a team dedicated entirely to gathering information, identifying dangerous parties, and uncovering hostile plots. It was very much, the first time, it was not the first time an intelligence, agency or group had ever been created in the world, to be sure, but it was the first time, definitely, the colonists would have to do something like that. So this is what they're trying to do. They have this threat from Tyrone, or I'm just going to call him Tyrone, William Tyrone, coming in, just coming out openly saying, the royal governor must undermine the cause. So if you're a loyal, so pretty much the Tyrone ship became, the spot to go if you wanted to link up with the crown in some form or fashion. So as Washington urged the Continental Congress to send more troops to New York, Tyrone and his fellow loyalists decided to try and recruit some of these soldiers for the loyalist cause. Apparently they did succeed. In mid-June, Thomas Hickey and another lifeguard soldier, Michael Lynch, this is again in 76, were arrested and imprisoned for passing counterfeit money. While in jail, they told a fellow prisoner, Isaac Ketchum, that they, along with other members of the lifeguard, were involved in a plan to undermine the British cause, or so the Patriot cause, on behalf of the British. They were agents on the inside, seeking leniency for himself. Ketchum told authorities what Hickey and Lynch had said. So this is kind of the all-time classic criminal move, like, no honor among thieves. If you tell a secret, if you try, you got to be very careful with who telling this stuff, because, you see who is in charge, and really you see who your bread is buttered, and your immediate, that immediate change of them making that mistake and telling that that one prisoner, Isaac Ketchum, that they were going to try and assassinate George Washington, and him just happened. Like, think about how significant really that would have been if that had not been the case. And we saw someone like Isaac Ketchum, maybe he was, the prison was controlled by Brits for some reason, and it was like, or Brits were kind of like closer into town, or there was like a loyalist owned it. I don't know, it was a private prison. I don't even know if they had those back then, or something like that. Whatever the situation would be, it could have been a completely different situation. And they hadn't decided to try and recruit or try and brag with Isaac Ketchum, at least. So acting on this information of the plot of Hickey and Lynch, two of the guys getting arrested must have not been a good thing for Washington. The fact that this comes out is going to be a big deal. So they act on this information as well as the testimony of other witnesses who would come forward separately. The committee tracked the conspiracy, arresting and interrogating David Matthews, mayor of New York City, along with dozens of other suspects. Even Washington's housekeeper, a woman named Mary Smith, appears to have been implicated, but we don't know if that exactly was the, we don't exactly know if she was involved. That could have just been a rumor, but, it would be pretty cool. Like Mary Smith, who's going to try and slip something in George Washington's drink and just kill the idea of America in its crib. And it's very, very kind of crazy to think that we were that close to that kind of a situation. So Hickey got in a little bit of trouble on June 26th. He faced a court-martial, and find out how that went in just 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, happy holidays, and thank you so much for supporting us this year. We are willing to give the gift of audio to you this holiday season, and boy, will it keep coming. We have an action-packed schedule through the 17th of December to the 16th of January, and that all starts with new episodes of Newsflash Now 3 times a week on our old summer schedule of Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In addition, Hidden History returns with 6 select episodes, 4 on Tuesdays and 2 on select Thursdays, to give you the perfect historical narrative to keep you interested through those times with the family this holiday season. It's been such a great year, and it couldn't have been as good for the Spencer Walsh Radio Network without your support. So, to another year of great audio. Of course, Hidden History is what you are now listening to. We thank you so much for doing so. And we're talking today about Thomas Hickey. He is the person who is part of George Washington's lifeguard. This dude gets arrested. He gets popped for another crime. And, he's already part of a plot here with the British to try and take out George Washington. He tries to recruit, brags about it a little bit in prison. The guy in prison says, hey, this guy Isaac Ketchum, he's like, okay, you know what I want to do? I want to get out of here, and I want to snitch on these mutineers. So after all 4 witnesses testified to the court-martial, including Ketchum, he was found guilty. Hickey was sentenced to death for sedition, mutiny, and also holding treacherous correspondence with the enemy for the most horrid and detestable purposes, according to the general orders issued from the Continental Army headquarters the next day. So, yeah, detestable and horrid purposes indeed there for Thomas Hickey. 2 days later, the future Massachusetts governor, William Eustis, then an army surgeon, was in the crowd at Hickey's execution, which took place near the intersection of the Grand and Christie Streets near the Bowery on Manhattan's Lower East Side. Fun fact, you can go see where this guy in New York was executed for this kind of plot, because it was kind of that point of the Revolutionary War where a lot of that action was happening around that time, and it was very, very much they needed to fight off the British in that area, which was kind of crawling, as I said before, with loyalist sympathies. Writing to Dr. David Townsend at the time, Eustis called Hickey the Hickey conspiracy, the greatest and vilest attempt ever made against our country. Wait till got many, many years to try and beat that, and I think a few things are gonna come close there. It's like our country, our not even fully formed country. This infernal plot, which is being tried by our enemies to describe the unthinkable, a plot against life, against the revered George Washington, General Washington, by the very people he most trusted. Eustis even coined a new term, sacricide, from the Latin words meaning slaughter of the good, as to just how outraged he felt. And it really just shows you, like, this stuff about people like George Washington, yeah, they really very much did like George Washington. There is no doubt about that. But by that time, rumors were swirling about the conspiracy, horrifying Eustis and many others. In the most sensational, but it was a false story, Mettler and Mensch recount, Hickey attempted to kill Washington by feeding him poisoned peas. In fact, the details of the loyalist plot, foiled by the secret committee's investigations, unfortunately remain kind of vague. Washington himself never mentioned a threat to his own life. Even in the letter he wrote to John Hancock, president of the Continental Congress, on the very morning of Hickey's execution. Nor do any of the official examinations of the committee mention a plan to kill Washington. Nevertheless, Melter and Mensch argued the evidence suggests the plotters intended to kill or at least kidnap Washington, and that Washington and the committee likely kept this under wrap to avoid causing panic and betraying weakness, just as the British were preparing to invade. And, it is, it's all obviously up to you whether you buy that, but, it is not an entirely unplausible idea to see that, the British are coming, you got an entire, army really doing something quite bold going up against the British Empire, but, like, given your current position, things are not looking good. George Washington already has this kind of myth, and if he was kind of like one betrayed from within, everyone's going to be turning their head. It's not a very good situation, pre-battle that you really want to be in at all. Yeah, so it definitely is a very crazy situation all around there. And pretty much what happened after that was a very interesting situation. Hickey may have been dead, but Washington could not afford to rest, because this was kind of a very key time in the war. In a letter to Hancock on June 28th, the general noted that a fleet of 130 ships had sailed from Halifax, Nova Scotia, then a British colony, in early June, with General William Howe and a large fleet of reinforcements. Within the days, the main body of the British fleet prepared to land on Staten Island, unloading their forces in preparation to strike. So yeah, New York really, they're turning into a war zone. On July 2nd, 1776, he issued, Washington did, more orders to his waiting troops. The time is now at hand, near at hand, which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves. So yeah, again, the really kind of funny part of this, and just all throughout the founding father rhetoric, the founding father kind of hype, is all these references to them kind of comparing themselves at the time as to like slaves of the British Empire, and then all while, a big portion of their economy throughout this time too was very much built on the conduction of at this time I think it was more tobacco, and then around the turn of the century was the kind of the cotton gin, where things really took off, and that was right, as the United States was starting, and it really relied and built this country, slave labor, and, really did. So, meanwhile, in Philadelphia, delegates to the Continental Congress debated the historic declaration drafted by Thomas Jefferson, abandoning forever the reconciliation of Britain, in launching a new phase of the colony's struggle for independence. So yeah, there you have it. There, the Hickey plot, a very interesting situation, and George Washington dealing with African Americans. All very complex and interesting. That is about all that I have for you today, though. We will be back, but possibly on Thursday. If not, we'll be back due next Thursday for our 6th episode. But we will definitely be back on Wednesday for more Newsflash.